Welcome to your 15-minute yoga for hip flexors. If you have 2 blocks, I recommend grabbing them for this practice. If not, totally fine, but they will be a great prop and tool to use. So let's get started. Start sitting on our legs if this is comfortable for you. Otherwise, find Sukhasana, a comfortable seat, so legs just crisscross applesauce. And from here, relax your arms down beside you and think about creating length through your spine. Let your eyes fall closed. So pretend a string is pulling the crown of your head to the sky and hips are grounding down towards your heels. Roll your shoulders down your back. Breathe in. And breathe out. Again, inhale, fill. Then exhale, let it go. And a few more rounds of breath just like that. So our breath carries our prana, and our prana is our life force energy. As we inhale, we're inviting life into our body. We're inviting expansion. We're inviting creation. We're inviting oneness into our body with every inhale. Now imagine on your exhale, you're releasing tension. You're releasing something that you're holding on to that you no longer need. So as we exhale, we're clearing out the old, the musty, the murky, what we no longer need to create space to invite in breath, oneness, expansion. We're letting go of tension and tightness in our bodies and our minds to open up. That's exactly what we'll do in this practice today. Now start to walk your hands behind you if you're sitting on your legs in Virasana, and lift your chest up. Look up towards the ceiling. So opening through your heart, squeeze your shoulders in. Now you can also do this sitting cross-legged. Option here, if you're in Virasana, to lift your hips up a bit. Start to open through the fronts of your hips. Gaze up. Maybe even lift just an inch. Breathe in. Breathe out. Lower your hips down. Now send both legs straight in front of you. We'll find Dandasana. So it seems like a simple pose, but it's actually quite challenging. So we're creating as much length and activation here as possible. Hands root down next to your hips. Feet are flexed. Legs are long, activated and straight as much as possible. Spine is also activated and straight. Your head's pulling up to the sky. Now keep this shape as you reach your arms up on an inhale, arms to the sky. On your exhale, hinge from your hips, reach forward. Your spine stays as straight and long as possible. It should really activate your hamstrings. Inhale, lift up. Exhale, hinge forward. Last 2, inhale, lift. Exhale, hinge. Final 1, lift up. Hinge forward and stop where you feel your spine start to round. So we don't want to be hunchback here. We want length and space. Maybe you grab onto your shins, your ankles, your feet. So keep reaching forward length as your shoulders roll down your back. Breathe in and breathe out. So notice the sensation in the front of your hips and your hip flexors. Bow a little bit deeper. On your next inhale, rise up. Hands plant behind you. Option 1 is to stay here with your hands grounded, hips grounded, heart up. Option 2 is dig your heels down, reverse plank. Pull your core in, so activate your lower bandhas. That's your core lock, your Mula Bandha and Uddiyana Bandha. Tuck your tailbone under to open your hip flexors even more here. So get a little more of a hip flexor opener if you're in this reverse plank. I encourage you to try it out. Breathe in and breathe out. Slow lower down. From here, send your legs behind you. Now knees together, feet out wide. I suggest using a block for this one if you have one, or if you have something like a blanket or a pillow you can sit on, highly recommend this one. So you'll place a block or something to sit on under your glutes. So knees are together, heels are a little bit wider than your hips. Now if you don't have a block, you can also just stay here elevated, totally fine, or maybe you can sit all the way down without the block. So take what you need right here, and then we'll start to crawl our hands back. Now this is a great way to open the fronts of your hips. The farther you can lay down, the more you can open up. Maybe you come all the way down to forearms, and you can open your chest up, look up. Think you're trying to almost lift your hips up off the block. One more breath here. Your next inhale, find your way out from wherever you are. Remove your block. we'll come into tabletop. In your tabletop, shoulders over wrists, hips over knees, invite in some movement. Maybe you sway side to side. It could be some cat and cow. So inhale to lower your belly, pull your heart through, look to the sky. Exhale, arch your back, chin to chest, belly button to spine, press your mat away. Take a few more rounds of cat and cows or whatever it is that is speaking to you. Noticing what shows up in your body, noticing anywhere that feels stuck or anywhere that feels not authentic to you, not like you. Maybe something you're holding on to that you no longer need to carry. From here, come through center and step your right foot between your hands. We're coming into Anjaneyasana low lunge. Now this is the one I've been working on the most for hip flexors recently. So again, if you have blocks, great time to grab them. You'll plant your hands onto your blocks. You can also plant your hands onto your hips. So in our low lunge, we're taking this a little bit different than normal. Imagine scooping your tailbone under. So you can use your hands to visibly do this. You scoop it under. Now notice this opens up the front of my hip flexor a lot more. I can bend into the right knee a little bit. Hands come down to the blocks or stay on your hips. Maybe they come to your thigh. So find what you need here. But oftentimes, me especially, we dump into our low back in this pose, and so we're not actually opening up the hip flexor enough. And by dumping into the low back, we're causing our hip flexors to stay really tight. So the goal here is to get more into the hip flexors, less dumping into our low back. That's more hip flexor opening and activation. They're more flexible. So in any kind of lunge or position like this, make sure you're scooping under if you really want to get into that hip flexor. So hold for just one more breath. On your next exhale, send your hips back. Half splits, Ardha Hanumanasana. So hands can come to blocks. Maybe blocks frame your foot, or no blocks are needed. You bow forward. Now notice that right hip flexor. So right here, we're flexing it. Flexing means getting smaller versus extending, which is what we were just doing on the other side. And bow your chest. If we want more flexibility in our hip flexors, we want to work both on the flexion and extension of them. Keep bowing forward. Of course, this is really getting to our hamstring, but a lot of these poses that activate our hamstrings in a fold also get the hip flexors. So bow your chest, soften your shoulders. One more breath. On your next inhale, bend back into your right knee. Come back through tabletop. Shift your hips side to side. And then we'll switch it out. So left foot steps through. Same thing here in your low lunge. You can use your blocks, hands to hips, hands on your thigh. Take what you need. Again, we're scooping our tailbone under to open through that right hip flexor. Here's the key. Notice if it feels a little more intense or like more of an open on one side than the other. That may mean that one hip flexor is tighter than the other. So just something to notice. And if one side is tighter than the other, the more open side, we don't want to push it all the way. We tend to want to go all the way in poses as far as we can go to stretch more, which is great. But if you want to even it out, one side is more flexible, go 70%. And the less flexible side, go as much as you can. This will help you get a little more even on each side. So it's one more breath here. And then send your hips back. Bow your chest into your half split. So again, we're keeping length through our spine. Dig your left heel down, pull the crown of your head long. Notice these sensations in that right hip flexor as you're releasing from the last pose, and in the left hip flexor entering into this pose. Adjust your blocks if you have them as needed, or hands. You can come down to the mat or to your sides. And then bend back into your left knee. Find your way to your tabletop and invite in a few rounds of movement right here. When you're ready, tuck your toes. We'll meet in downward facing dog. Lift your hips to the sky, heels towards the earth. And stretching out your calves. You can bend into one knee and bend into the other. Add a little bit of movement in this down dog. Now crawl your hands back to meet your feet. Slowly, slowly, slowly. You're hinging from your hips here. Keep that long spine. Find your forward fold, Uttanasana. Head is heavy, chin tucks into your chest. On your next inhale, slowly roll up to stand, vertebrae by vertebrae. Your head rises last. Once you arrive here, interlace your hands behind your back. Now send your hips forward, heart up, look up, and then draw your knuckles down. Now ensure you're not dumping into your low back. You're pressing your hips forward and engaging your low belly, your low core, your bandhas, to make sure your core is engaged and hip flexors are working here as they open. Look up. Breathe in. Breathe out. Keep your bound forward folds, a little bend in your knees. Arms fall overhead. Head is heavy. Now really bow your chest as close as possible to your thighs. Let your hands fall down to the mat. Bend into one knee, bend into the other. Crawl your hands out to a high plank and lower all the way down. We'll work on a few more poses to open up our hip flexors. So from here, feet are as wide as the mat, hands as wide as the mat as well. It's seal pose. Inhale to rise up. The same thing here. We don't want to be dumping too much into our low back. So think, you're pulling your low belly in to activate your core. Now notice where your hip flexors are. If they're really lifted, walk your hands out a bit more. So you're still feeling it in your hip flexors. But think you're pulling your belly button forward toward the top of your mat almost, and then heart through, shoulders back. Press up a little more and notice the sensation in the front of your hips. So try a few different ways here. Maybe you pull your chest through more. Maybe you try to ground your hips down more. So try a few different movements and places you put your energy and pressure. And notice where you feel it the most in your hip flexors and the least in your low back. Take one more inhale and one more exhale. Now start to bend your knees. Notice how that changes the pose, and notice if you can drop your hips down a little more while pulling your heart through and looking up. Breathe in. Then breathe out, lower all the way to your belly. Press up through tabletop. Now from here, lift your right leg up, left hand reaches back. See if you can catch your foot and start to kick your leg up. Opening up the front of the right hip right here. Pull your heart through. Now, if it feels tough to grab your foot, no problem. Release it. You can just actively reach back and think you're lifting your quad up. Notice the opening in the front of your right hip. Breathe in. And breathe out, release. We'll take that on the other side. Left leg kicks back, right hand reaches back. Option to grab your foot and lift up. Breathe in. And breathe out. One more inhale. Exhale, release it. Shift your hips side to side. And that concludes our short yoga for hip flexors practice. Feel free to take a quick shavasana if it's calling you. I very much encourage that. Take time just to be, to breathe, and to let all of that integrate and settle. And I can't wait to practice with you again. See you next time.